The Love, Life, and Lose Weight podcast will teach you the art and science of changing your habits around food. If you know what to do, but can't figure out why you're just not doing it, this is the right podcast for you. I'm your host, Advanced Certified Weight and Life Coach, Heather Beardsley. I've helped hundreds of women just like you figure out how to think and eat like a normal eater, lose weight, and love life on the journey to goal weight and beyond. Hey, welcome to episode 61, Breaking Free. I've just got off some sessions with some of my clients, and I want to talk to you about common recurring motif that I see in many of my clients. And I'm thinking that this will be applicable to many of you. So let me frame it this way. I think many of you know that the way that I teach weight loss without restriction and coach on it is to help you recognize that the bill of goods that we were sold, many of us from Gen X or even earlier, and even some millennials too, we were told that if you want to change your weight because you have weight to lose, it's because you're eating foods that aren't good for you, that you shouldn't eat, and that block weight loss. And my theory about weight loss, how to keep it sustainable, is to take away the rightness and wrongness of foods and make that completely neutral. So instead of the old diet mentality thought is there's right foods and wrong foods for me to eat. And the reason why I have to lose weight is because I'm eating the wrong things and I'm eating too much of the wrong things. And if I can just get myself to stop doing that, then I will get to my goal weight. So I have to kind of override these internal desires I have for the wrong things and just kind of make myself comply through the tools that we're given with weight loss. I don't know, maybe you count calories, maybe you count macros, maybe you're using planning as a restrictive form of getting yourself to comply with being more virtuous in how you plan for and eat your food so you can get your weight right. That's all diet mentality. Now, if that was right, then there wouldn't be any people walking around the earth who are at the perfect natural weight for them who eat unvirtuous foods. But yet we know, and we see this every day out in the world. People are in their natural happy weight and they're eating all manner of foods from the most virtuous and nutritious to the least virtuous. And we marvel at them. And how does the brain explain that when we're in diet mentality? Well, usually what it is it starts to become a repeated thought of, well, that's for other people, but it doesn't work that way for me. Other people can eat that way, but I can't because I can't control myself around food, or I have too hard of a relationship with, you know, unvirtuous foods like cookies or ice cream or whatever it might be. And so that's how we explain this conundrum that we find ourselves in when we're in diet mentality. And like I said before, I think a lot of you know that the way that I teach weight loss without restriction is we just make it a fact that everybody has different tastes and preferences for food, and that your tastes and preferences for food are not right or wrong. So in this way, food is just food. It's a choices for you to make so that you have free will and self-determination in your life with your food lifestyle. And if your weight is a level at which you want to change that to lose weight, then losing weight without restriction is a process of becoming aware of whether you are eating in response to your physical cues for hunger? And are you responding appropriately to when you've had enough? Are you even paying attention to your physical cues? Because the truth is, for most of us who grew up enveloped in diet mentality that says other people know better, different programs know better about how you should regulate your weight, we've completely disconnected ourselves from our hunger, our built in feedback mechanisms that will keep us at the perfect weight. If you think about it, there is no feedback mechanism in the body that tells us what is right and what is wrong to eat, except, sensitivities, right? Like inflammation, bloating, allergic responses. Those we can trust, of course. If you're in pain, physical pain after you eat something, that is a feedback mechanism for what's right and wrong to eat. But for most of us, when we're looking at us, whether or not to eat a salad versus a cookie for lunch, there is no internal feedback mechanism for that unless you have specific sensitivities or allergies to those foods, or maybe something else medically is going on with you with some of those, but those would be the exceptions rather than the rule. So for many of us to try to change this idea, these beliefs about what's right and wrong to eat and how we are right and wrong for our natural tastes and preferences for certain foods, and then come over here to, a weight loss and weight maintenance model that says you can have the things you like. You just have to become aware of when you need fuel, and that's when you eat the things that you like. And you need to become aware of when you have had physically enough food so that you're not overfueling your body. For a more detailed discussion on all of this is all in my book. So if you feel like this is you, please go out and buy my book. It's also available on Audible if it's easier for you to listen audibly to the book. But it goes in great depth and detail about these foundations. But here's what I see for most of you who are actively working on weight loss without restriction. This is how the process gets kind of perverted by a brain that holds on to those vestiges of safety that we still believe restrictive thinking about food gives us. And that will look like, for example, you're overeating foods that you have an awareness that you've been wanting, but you're not planning them. So this is a big reason why we plan food. We don't plan food so that you put down virtuous things and then tell yourself you have to be compliant with them. No. And if you're doing that, you're going to notice that you're not following the plan that you put down. You will not be eating the foods that you put down because the version of you that put them down is a diet mentality version of you. One that's believing that I have to eat these things in order to lose weight and I can't have the burger and fries. But it's not a problem to not put burger and fries down, right? You can have salads. Of course you can. You can have any kind of virtuous foods, so-called virtuous foods. The problem is when you're writing one thing down and you're eating another way, that tells me as your coach that you're in diet mentality. Why aren't you putting those foods down? And usually when you ask yourself, why am I not just putting the burger down when I know that I want the burger? It's usually because of fear, because, well, Heather might say that I can have the burger, but I know that I always tend to overeat the burger and or the fries that come with it. And so I'm afraid to. And this is the cost of throwing off old beliefs. Think about a flat earther way back when they believed the earth was flat. When was that? I don't know, 1400, something like that. Maybe earlier. I mean, if you believed the earth was flat because you were told it was, this is how the world works, you're probably not going to get in a ship and go test that theory. 99.9999% of the people just took it at face value and they're like, don't get in the ship and go very far because you're going to fall off the earth and die. And we're really, when we're moving from this paradigm of diet mentality keeps us safe with our weight over to permission to eat the things I want to eat and learning how to have them with my hunger and my physical enough cues is actually what keeps me safe. It requires a leap of faith where you're going to get in that ship and you're going to go further than you ever did before. There's going to be a lot of uncertainty and doubt. But how else will you ever know if you're able to lose weight, eating the foods you truly want to eat, and practicing having them with your hunger and enough cues is actually the way that works. You have to prove it to yourself. You have to get in that ship. You have to be on the edge of your comfort zone. And you've got to try it again and again and again and again. I'm pausing because I really want you to see and recognize when you're doing this. This is the adventure of a lifetime. And here's what your argument should be with self. If I don't do this, I will always be in a food prison. Acting against my own tastes and preferences for food, bossing myself around and trying to get myself to comply with some idea of what eating for my perfect weight should look like without trusting myself and figuring out my own individual blueprint. Maybe this, one of my clients way back when, she had like a few pounds left to lose. And she was grappling with this last idea of like having ice cream and pretzels. And she couldn't figure out how to have them. She was always overeating them. And that was keeping her a few pounds above her natural happy weight. And for her individual solution at the time we worked together, and maybe it's changed since then, is to have the ice cream and the pretzels for a meal twice a week rather than trying to stuff it in afterward. Why would she try to stuff it in afterward? Well, she wasn't. She was just trying to think like, well, I can't have that if I want to be at my goal weight. Says who? Again, look at the evidence of the people walking around the earth who are having pretzels and ice cream and they are at their natural weight. They're not like lifting the natural laws of physics of the universe. They're just not overeating. They're having the things they want and they're trusting themselves to figure out when and how often and how much they can have it so that they can stay at their goal weight, get to their goal weight, and feel satisfied and delighted by their food and not like they're in a food jail. So this is what the cost is of getting rid of diet mentality. To break free from diet mentality, you have to start giving yourself permission to have the foods that you want to have. I have a whole chapter about this in my book of when I first started planning for chocolate croissants. I mean, I was like, whoa, felt like the end of the world to me. Because with everything in my brain, I believed I could not control myself around chocolate croissants. I had such a high desire for them. And I felt like it seemed so logical to me that you have to restrict how much you allow yourself to have these in order for you to not overeat them and blow your weight, right? But really, it was my lack of permission to have them that was creating the over desire in the first place. So making sure that every food that you overeat in the course of a week, that you work into your next week's plan is part of the solution for how to break free from diet mentality. Okay. I want to give you one more example. The other example where we see breaking free from diet mentality is using the challenges against yourself that inevitably come with weight loss, right? We know it's not a perfect process. We know that in figuring out how often you can overeat and what is, your 70% full. For more on this, you can go back to episode 55 for what percentage to enough to eat to that keeps you getting results or keeps you at your goal weight. We're going to overstep that sometimes, and we're going to see a negative result on the scale, or maybe we'll see a maintain where we were hoping to lose. And it's real easy in these moments where we feel disappointed or we feel resistant to what we're seeing. And we use that as evidence that this is too hard for us. We're doing it wrong and we're never going to be successful. And then that allure of like the siren call of diet mentality starts to come in and say, just see, I knew it. You shouldn't have planned those cookies. You shouldn't have planned those chips. See, it doesn't work. And what you have to do in this situation is you have to argue with any thought that tempts you to start restricting what you're eating and planning for it with permission. So in this case of getting on the scale and feeling disappointed, this is what your data is for. This is why I want you to plan and assess every day. If you sign up for my email list, you get on the first email a link to download my daily planner. And there's a space in there for all of this, or you can just replicate it on your own daily planner. It doesn't really matter. But the reason why I want you to plan for what food to eat is so that you can get a good idea of what you've been doing all week after you weigh in, or even before you weigh in. Like ideally, before you weigh in, before you even get that number, I want you to have a data-driven hypothesis in your head for what the scale will say, not based on what your negative brain might think or say about it or predict, but based on the data. So you'd flip through your previous 7 days of food plans. And hopefully when you've assessed, you've circled or somehow indicated any foods that you ate when you were not hungry or that you ate past what is physically enough food. And so it was an overeat. And so you have an idea of how often you were overeating. And for the other meals that you weren't overeating, they should check out in your recollection of how you ate. How much, what percentage full did you eat to? I mean, for a lot of my clients, I say just put the percentage on there. We know that in the blue zones in Okinawa, to be exact, they have a practice of hara hachibu, which means they eat to 80% full. And that's what keeps them at the optimal weight to maintain their weight for their life. So if we're talking about weight loss, we need to be eating consistently slightly under 80%, not a ton less, because that's also restrictive, but slightly less, maybe 75%, maybe 70%. And again, you can go back just a few episodes ago, which I think it was 55 secrets to eating less and feeling satisfied. I have a whole step-by-step process for how to figure that out. So you go through your 7 days, you look at your data, and after 8 weeks of doing this, you should have pretty good evidence of how many overeats you can have combined with when you're not overeating, what percentage full are you eating to? And based on those numbers, you make a prediction of what your weight will say. You get on the scale and you compare. How is your prediction? Does it make sense? If it doesn't make sense, then we know your sense of overeating or your percentage full that you're eating to could be skewed. We'll look there. We'll look closer, right? Sometimes it works in the opposite, where you have more of a loss than you thought you would. And so maybe you're overestimating what you're eating too, which is that sometimes happens. So to break free, we have to question thinking, like when you get on the scale, if it's not something that you thought you might have in terms of results, well, what did you think it was going to say? Were you specific? Because a lot of us just like hope for any kind of loss. But all the time, my clients come in and they'll be like, well, I only lost zero point 0.4. As if that's a fact, that 0.4 of a loss somehow doesn't count as a loss. I've even had a client come in, her second session with me after being set up with her plan for how to lose weight. And it's all negative. She's very disappointed. And we go through the whole thing. And then I said, well, how much, what did the scale say? And she said, well, it was only a 3-pound loss. Do you see how the subjective, fearful, negative brain will throw out responses and thoughts to what's happening that will skew your idea of success or not? It's an unreliable narrator hardwired into your brain, into your internal experience. So we need to always be using our manager brain to be specific, use data, and to tell stories, a perspective of what's happening on purpose that will motivate you to keep going and to really embrace this idea of maybe it sounds like this. I haven't figured it out yet, but I know I can trust myself to figure out how to eat the food I truly want to eat day to day and learn how to not overeat it so much that it creates a weight problem for me. Or I can learn how to overeat less over time so that I can lose all my weight. Okay. So this is how to break free from diet mentality. To summarize, you will be making a plan and you will not be following it. Now, this happens sometimes. Of course, we know it's not always indicative, but a pattern of compliance with what you said you'd eat, anything less than like 75% compliance, we know that there's some kind of virtuous planning going on there, some diet mentality of have to, need to, should thinking about what to eat that will keep you losing weight. And we know it's actually the opposite is true. When you think you have to eat a certain way or comply with a certain way, that actually sets you up to overeat the forbidden foods that you don't give yourself permission to eat. So you're actually creating your own over desire by not giving yourself permission to have those foods. Look, I know it's scary to try it. I overate croissants for 3 weekends in a row. But guess what? By the 4th weekend, I didn't. And I haven't since. I've never overeaten them since. Imagine what that feels like to be free from feeling like you can't control yourself around food. This is just a psychological construct in the brain of human beings, where when we perceive a lack of supply, even if it's from our own permission to have food, we will over desire it. So if you are having an excess of desire for certain foods and you're overeating, I really want you to look at that. Okay. And when you're getting on the scale, in my second example, and you're feeling disappointed, what many of you are doing is you're using that disappointment against yourself. You're making disappointment mean this isn't working. I can't do this. This is too hard. This never works for me. Rather than really looking at the disappointment and that data and saying, does the data actually support the result on the scale? And when you go through your data and you really look, more than likely you'll see evidence in the data to support the scale. Now, that's not always true. That's not always the case, especially if you've been in the car a long time or You've had Chinese food, like the MSG and Chinese food will always cause a ton of water retention. I see that a lot. Flying on an airplane can keep your weight up for up to 3 days. So can a very hard workout. Stress, something going on in your life, this white elephant in your life that you're stressing over, that's going to affect what the scale does. And really, the disappointment then, if that is happening, let's say you have been doing everything. You've been following your max overeats, you've been strategic, you've been planning your food, and you feel disappointed by the scale. Well, I want you to start to shift from the number giving you permission to feel good about your efforts to really looking at your habits that you practiced. Because if you did show up with intention, you planned those foods, you stayed aware, you did your best, then you're missing an opportunity to celebrate yourself no matter what the scale says. We don't want the scale, which measures so much more than your relative weight gain or weight loss, right? There's inflammation, there's sodium, there's electrolytes, right? There's sickness, there's stress, like I mentioned. It's an imperfect measurement of good efforts toward weight loss. And sometimes also certain bodies, they don't lose week to week. They kind of like they hold, and then they'll kind of dump weight. So this could be something that is really missing where we are looking for external validation to feel good about what we're doing, where we wait for the scale to spit out a certain squiggle on the screen in order for us to feel good about our efforts. This needs to be an inside job where you see you witness you, not just the results of your efforts, but how you showed up. Does how you showed up that week look like the future version of you who is aware, following her body cues, and not being restrictive around food? Well, if she is, why would you ever hold back your own positive self-regard and validation of those efforts? This is really what we're after. We're not after the scale having certain squiggles, because that doesn't ever make us feel good about what we've achieved. This is an internal process of you validating you taking pride and good feelings from even the challenges on your journey. And that's how you throw off diet mentality. You stop looking for the external to tell you what's right, and you incorporate that process internally for yourself. So I hope that was helpful. This week, your coach homework is to take a look at how you're planning. And I want you to identify from the last week, the previous 7 days, anything that you overate. And I want you to really work with this week by planning for those things on purpose, where you also practice enjoyment of that food because you're having it with permission and you're holding out that belief that you can have it and also get to your goal weight. And you're also honoring your body cues. You're having it when you're physically hungry. You've noticed those clues, those cues coming from physical hunger before you have that food, and that you're enjoying it. You're staying focused on the experience of eating so that you can create some emotional satisfaction in the having of it, so that when you notice that you're at what is physically enough, ideally 70 to 75% if we're in weight loss, or 80% if you're trying to maintain. And that will make it easier for you to stop eating when you've reached that amount. Okay. This is really about not using those old beliefs to pull you back down into a hard story for how your food lifestyle is. And instead, we want to break free. We want to argue back with any of those old limited thinking patterns that come up. I want you to argue with it like you used to maybe when you were a teenager, arguing with your parents, right? Think about that version of you. She believed in herself, her own self-determination. And she wanted to tell her parents, you don't know what's right for me. I know what's right for me. Right? I'm figuring this out. I may not have a lot of practice with this, but I'm going to have a voice in me growing into the person I want to be. And this is you as well with your own non-restrictive outlook on weight loss. You're figuring out your voice. You have to speak what that is to these old limiting beliefs. Talk back to them, argue in your own defense, get in touch with your body, ground yourself, pause before you go into automatic mode, make it intentional. And I'll see you back here next time. Okay. And if you want that daily planning worksheet, just listen to the end of the podcast. I give you instructions for how to get it in a download. Okay. So stay focused. So long. Hey, if this episode resonated for you, then let's connect. Visit hbeardsley.com/subscribe. That's hbeardsley.com/subscribe and get on the list. You'll get a free gift, periodic coaching, plus advance notice of in-person events and workshops.